From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
Part of the challenge that we confront is that even the slightest hint of some sensible, responsible legislation in this area fans this notion that somehow here it comes and that everybody's guns are going to be taken away.
A month after the massacre at Sandy Hook Elementary School, President Obama is calling today for a ban on assault weapons and high-capacity ammunition magazines. The NRA says Congress won't approve either. We'll spend the hour on guns, beginning with Colin Goddard, a survivor of the Virginia Tech massacre that killed 32.
What we're up against is an industry, people who profit when other people use bullets and fire them at other people anytime. So we really have to engage the citizens' voice here to drown out the gun lobby, the industry that profits from shootings like this continually in our country.
We'll also host a debate about placing armed police officers in schools. Critics say this helps create a school-to-prison pipeline. And we'll speak with Peter Stone on how the NRA's deep financial ties to the firearms industry. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. President Obama is set to propose sweeping new gun restrictions today, more than a month after the Newtown school massacre. Obama will reportedly call for a ban on assault weapons and high-capacity ammunition magazines, as well as expanded background checks for gun buyers. In Washington, White House Press Secretary Jay Carney said Obama will hold a campaign-style public event to unveil his proposals.
The President and Vice President will hold an event here at the White House to unveil a package of concrete proposals to reduce gun violence and prevent future tragedies like the one in Newtown, Connecticut. They will be joined by children from around the country who wrote the President letters in the wake of that tragedy, expressing their concerns about gun violence and school safety along with their parents.
We'll be joined by a gun victim who will be at that event later in the broadcast. Obama's gun violence initiative comes as New York Governor Andrew Cuomo has signed into law a new measure expanding the state's ban on assault weapons, limiting ammunition clips to 7 rounds, and imposing new mental health screening for purchases of weapons. We'll spend the rest of the hour on U.S. gun violence after headlines. The House has approved a $50 billion package for the victims of Superstorm Sandy after failing to pass the measure before the previous congressional term ended last month. Republicans had come under wide criticism after delaying the vote, forcing millions of Sandy victims to continue waiting for federal aid. Tuesday's legislation was approved over the objections of 80 Republicans who demanded any spending on Sandy relief be matched by an equal amount in cuts to government spending. French troops are preparing to engage in direct combat with rebels in Mali after beginning the first ground offensive of their military intervention. France has launched airstrikes in Mali for the past 6 days in a bid to oust rebels that have held the country's north since March. French forces began heading north overnight, setting the stage for clashes on the ground. You can go to our website at democracynow.org for our discussion about Mali. The U.S. has backed France's operation with surveillance and logistical support. Speaking in Spain, Defense Secretary Leon Panetta said the U.S. is considering French requests for additional military help.
We are discussing in Washington some of the requests that have been made to determine exactly what assistance we can provide. Our goal is to try to do what we can to provide whatever assistance is necessary in order to help them in that effort. But specifically in what areas, that's still something that is under discussion.
The Washington Post reports France has asked for U.S. intelligence that could be used for targeting purposes, a request that could raise questions under international law. The U.S. is also reportedly considering whether to help France transport its troops and military supplies. The Obama administration said to be wary of deepening its involvement in Mali after having trained military leaders that ended up staging a coup and even joining the rebels' fight. The U.S.-backed French strikes in Mali have already killed a reported 11 civilians, including 3 children. On Tuesday, an Amnesty International spokesperson called for the deployment of international human rights monitors and urged all sides to safeguard civilian life.
Amnesty is calling for an immediate deployment of human rights monitors precisely because the risk to civilians is so great. And this isn't risk just posed by indiscriminate bombing, but Amnesty's documented over the course of fighting in northern Mali sexual violence, rape of women and children, torture, arbitrary arrests, extrajudicial executions. If there's any hope that the civilians aren't going to bear the brunt of these security operations, we have to have monitors in place, and it has to be done with very much urgency.
At least 87 people were reportedly killed Tuesday when a series of bombings struck the campus of Syria's Aleppo University. Both rebels and government forces have blamed each other for the attack. The town of Aleppo has been the site of constant violence, with both sides of the Syrian conflict in control of different areas. Syria's military has apparently launched a new offensive against Aleppo rebels in the aftermath of Tuesday's bombings. The Israeli military has forcibly prevented Palestinians and solidarity activists from returning to the site of a dismantled encampment that challenged Israel's ongoing settlement expansion in the West Bank. On Tuesday, Israeli forces used stun grenades to stop a group of around 50 people seeking to re-pitch tents they'd erected at what they called Bab al-Shams, Arabic for Gate of the Sun, in the so-called E1 settlement zone that bisects the West Bank. It marked the activists' first attempt to reclaim the site after Israeli forces raided them over the weekend. The E1 construction had largely been put on hold following U.S. objections dating back to President George W. Bush. But Israel resumed work there last month in response to the UN voting recognizing Palestine as a non-member observer state. The Obama administration's refused to pressure Israel for a building halt, limiting its reaction to calling the E1 expansion, quote, counterproductive. Clashes also erupted in the occupied West Bank Tuesday at the funeral of an unarmed Palestinian teen killed by Israeli troops. 17-year-old Samir Awad was shot multiple times as he tried to walk away from Israeli soldiers near the Israeli separation wall that carves up the West Bank. Samir's brother said he was killed on his way to write a final exam at school.
He was on his way to school because he had an exam, his last school exam. After half an hour, they called and told us that my brother was wounded.
Samir Awad was reportedly the 4th Palestinian killed by Israeli forces in the occupied territories in the last 4 days, including a farmer shot in the head in the Gaza Strip. Israeli forces fired tear gas and rubber-coated bullets at mourners who threw stones following Awad's funeral. At the United Nations, a spokesperson reaffirmed UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon's view that Israeli settlements are illegal and called for an end to their expansion.
He notes the Israeli settlements in the West Bank are illegal under international law. The Secretary-General repeats his call that any such settlement plans for E1 must be rescinded. Interior
Secretary Ken Salazar is reportedly stepping down rather than stay on for President Obama's second term. Salazar is said to have made plans to leave Obama's cabinet by the end of March. Democratic Governor Martin O'Malley of Maryland is preparing to unveil a measure that would ban the death penalty in a state. O'Malley made the announcement in an appearance with leaders of the NAACP.
The death penalty is expensive, and it does not work. And for that reason alone, I believe we should stop doing it. This week, once again, I will be filing legislation to repeal the death penalty in Maryland. And
if the ban is approved, Maryland would become the 18th state to abolish capital punishment. A U.S. Army sergeant who went AWOL in opposition to the war in Afghanistan has been detained and held at Fort Irwin, California. Mika Turner left his unit in September and later went public with his anti-war views. Supporters say he informed the military multiple times of his whereabouts since his desertion and even tried to turn himself in, but was only arrested earlier this month while visiting his parents' home. He's expected to be transferred to North Carolina's Fort Bragg, where his unit is based. Turner's reportedly spent 5 tours of duty in Iraq and Afghanistan. The late Internet freedom activist Aaron Swartz was laid to rest on Tuesday at a funeral near Chicago. Swartz killed himself on Friday, weeks before he was to go on trial for downloading millions of articles provided by the nonprofit research service JSTOR. He was facing 35 years in prison, a penalty supporters of Swartz called excessively harsh. Speaking to mourners, Swartz's father, Robert Swartz, continued to blame prosecutors for his son's death, saying he was, quote, killed by the government. In response to the family, the husband of prosecutor Carmen Ortiz has publicly criticized them on Twitter, claiming Swartz was offered a 6-month plea deal. The husband, IBM executive Tom Dolan, has since deleted his Twitter profile. Meanwhile, in Washington, Democratic Congressmember Zoe Lofgren of California has introduced a measure in honor of Aaron Swartz. Lofgren's bill, dubbed Aaron's Law, would modify the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act to omit terms of service breaches. In a statement, Lofgren said, quote, "There's no way to reverse the tragedy of Aaron's death, but we can work to prevent a repeat of the abuses of power he experienced." More than 8,000 school bus drivers and matrons have gone on strike in New York City in a dispute over job security and the outsourcing of their contracts. New York City has put its deals with the private bus companies that hire the drivers up for bidding, a move the drivers say could threaten their jobs at the end of the school year. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Nermeen Sheikh. Welcome to our listeners and viewers around the country and around.
Thanks so much for watching this report from Democracy Now!, your daily independent global news hour. We don't accept advertising or corporate funding, but rather rely on donations from viewers like you. Please make your contribution by visiting democracynow.org. We need your support today to keep bringing you this hard-hitting, in-depth reporting.